Hey YouTube, it's Pastor Dwayne here. So today we're going to take a look at that Byzantine versus TR comparison. Only this time I want to concentrate on one specific variant because there's some intra-TR variants in there that I think are very interesting to take a look at. So we left off here at chapter 13, and as you can see, I got quite a bit done here. We ended up at about halfway through chapter 21, but in going through this list, this one here stuck out to me the most. Matthew chapter 21, verse 7. Now, typically what I do when I'm going through these variants is I'll take a look at another apparatus just to double check and make sure. And in this one specifically, I took a look at Adam Boyd's Critical Greek New Testament, and I noticed it right here. Now, in this one, he listed the Scrivener's edition as standing alone. Now, there's some other TR editions in here. So if those TR editions were also matching, then this would have said TR instead of singling out Scrivener's editions. Kind of made me wonder if there was something going on in the Textus Receptus tradition. So I got an idea, and I got a hold of every single printed edition that I could get my hands on. I got the 5 editions of Erasmus's text. I was able to get 2 of Beza. I was able to get 2 of Elzivir's, 2 of Stephanus's. I was able to check the Complutensian polyglot, the Colinus, I don't even know how to pronounce that, and of course a couple others. So I took those and compared them just to see what they said, and the results were actually quite interesting. Now I don't want to just leave you there. Let's give you some context for this passage. So the passage we're taking a look at here is Matthew 21, verse 7, and Jesus is getting his disciples to go into a nearby village to get a colt and a foal for him so that he can march into Jerusalem triumphantly. So the disciples do as they say. They went in to get it, and the master of the house came out and gave them some grief, and Jesus told them beforehand that, if that happens, just say, the Lord has need of it, and he will give it to you. And so he gave them the donkey and the foal and sent them back to Jesus. Now, at this point, the disciples had to get the animals ready, so they put some clothes on them, and then Jesus sat on the donkey, and they went into Jerusalem. And that's the general context of this passage. If we take a look at the actual verse we're looking at, in the New King James Version, chapter 21, verse 7 reads, "They brought the donkey and the colt, laid their clothes on them, and set him on them." And set him on them. That is the phrase we're looking at. That's the variant there. And set him on them. Now, the ESV reads slightly differently. So the ESV, which is the other variant here, reads, "They brought the donkey and the colt and put on their cloaks, and he sat on them." And he sat on them. See, the difference is, in the New King James Version, the disciples set Jesus on the clothes, which were on the donkey. But then in the English Standard Version, it just simply says Jesus sat on them. Now, there's some debate as to what them is. Some think that them refers to the animals, the donkeys. Some think that the them refers to the clothes that the disciples put on. Now, I'm inclined to think that them refers to the clothes that they put on the donkey. So Jesus sat on the clothes, which were on the donkey. So either way, it almost doesn't matter because you find Jesus sitting on the donkey by the end of this phrase. So what that means is ultimately the impact of this variant is practically nil. I don't know of any place or any church or any teaching or any doctrine or anything like that that hinges upon this passage. It's really minute. So if we go back to the variant, let's pop open how we see in the critical edition here. If we go back to the variant, epikathesen, okay, that's singular. So this is a verb, and a verb will change based on how many people are doing the action. If it's one person doing the action, you have one form of the verb. If it's more than one, you have another form, which is exactly what happens with the other variant, epikatheson. See, the difference between these two is the epsilon and the alpha. So the epsilon ending signifies in this verb that this is singular. So the person doing this action is one. And this is where the ESV comes in, right? One person is he. But epikatheson, the alpha, makes it plural. So what that means is that there was multiple people doing this action. So there were likely to be the disciples were setting Jesus on the donkey. Now that's just in the modern printed editions. Remember I was saying here that Adam's edition here singles out the Scrivener edition, which means that the other printed editions that he used in the apparatus all have this one. So this is a variant in the Textus Receptus tradition. So I figured it might be interesting to take a look at as many early printed editions of the TR as I could to see what is happening here. And it really is interesting. But anyway, so if we come back over to the computer here, I put them on a spreadsheet just because it's easy to see and understand. And I found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different variants on this same phrase. And the two words that were most, I don't want to say problematic, but the two words which were mostly variant here are the verb. In this case, there were actually 3 different verbs used. There was etathi, etathesi, epikathizo, and ekathizo. There were 3 verbs amongst all those TR editions. And then there was another question as to whether the pronoun in there was avtis, which is singular genitive, or avton, plural genitive. Now, my assumption is based on the singular genitive that it might be referring to one of the donkeys or one of the animals that were brought back. And then avton, because it's plural genitive, is probably referring to the clothes that were set on top of the donkey. If you want to dispute that, you can go ahead, but I guess that's not really all that important for this video specifically here. But what makes these different? So if we take a look at these, the differences are, one is that pronoun, and then the various ways that epikathidsin is used. So I already noted that there's a verb here that's different than what's typically in the editions and in our printed editions. And this verb down here also, which is also different from the rest. The rest of them typically goes based on this verb, epikathizo. In this case, we have 2 renderings. So one in the singular with the epsilon, and one in the plural with the alpha. And then we have the same thing, only this time a variant spelling with eta here and eta here. And then, of course, they're different based on what pronoun and so on and so forth. So those are the differences. Now, the interesting thing is when you consider which editions are what. So all of these variants are mostly from Erasmus's first editions. In fact, almost all of these, except for this variant here and this variant here, these all only appear in Erasmus's editions. No other editions, just Erasmus. Same with this one here with the odd verbal reading, only appears in Erasmus's editions. Again, these are just the editions I was able to get my hands on. And then the Colleen's edition here also only appears in that one edition. Now, if we take a look at these other two, these are the 2 variants that we see in all of our modern printed editions, including Scrivener's. So if we bring this over, we can get a better idea of who's supporting what reading. So let me zoom out a little bit here, and you'll see that the 2 readings in the tradition are basically based on these endings here, singular or plural. So the one with the singular ending has the support, first of all, of Erasmus's 1519 edition, then the Complutensian Polyglot, then Stephanus's 1550 edition, and then the Antoniades 1904. Now, if you were wondering about modern printed editions, we have the NA28, the BizText, the Antoniades, SBL, Westcott, and Hort, basically all of them, except for Scrivener's, which you'll see is part of the plural variant. Now, what's interesting here is this specific variant was not picked up by Erasmus at all, except his 1535 edition would have, except it looks like a variant spelling there for epikathison. Now, I mean, we probably attribute that to the ioticization, so everything kind of took on an E sound later in the Greek language. So these would have been pronounced the same, which probably makes sense of why this letter here is a variant. But either way, the specific one here, ke epikathison with the iota and off-tone, wasn't picked up by Erasmus at all. But that was picked up by Stephanus in his 1551 edition, which again is interesting because in Erasmus's previous edition, in his 1550, he decided to go with the singular form instead of the plural form. So he made a change over in his later edition. And then, of course, Beza's 1598, Elzivir's 1624 edition, Elzivir's 1633 edition, and then lastly, we have Scrivener's edition on there. And so all of these guys went with the plural ending. You can see kind of based on the dates here that after Stephanus in his 1551 edition made it into the plural form, it sort of stayed in the text of the Textus Receptus. And so from that point on, it seems to have received the general acceptance to have the plural form there. And of course, you can see that coming through the additions there right up to Scriviner. So admittedly, this variant is really tiny, right? I mean, ultimately, Jesus ended up on the donkey and he rode in triumphantly into Jerusalem. That's the whole point of the passage. And I don't know of any denomination or any Christians that's ever made such a big deal about whether they sat him on the donkey or whether he just simply sat on the donkey. That's not something that I see debated. That's not something I see as a doctrinal point of contention. We just don't see that. So again, the stakes aren't very high for this variant specifically. So what this says to me is that even in the Textus Receptus tradition, as coherent as the printed editions are, there were still some textual things that needed to be worked through. And to me, that seems to be the definition of textual criticism. Now, granted, principles today are different than what Erasmus did, but ultimately, he had to sift through some work and make a decision on some readings. And it's really neat here because you can actually see a little bit of that process where the readings change slightly from edition to edition. And like Stephanus, for example, taking the 1550 as the singular form and then moving that over to the plural form, seemingly setting a standard, right? That 1551 seems to have set the standard here. I'd be curious to see if Stephanus' 1551 edition does that for other variant readings, if you can trace that down specifically to that edition. But either way, I just found this to be an interesting variant and something worth kind of skipping ahead to show you. Next week, we'll take a look at the other variants that I have in that spreadsheet and go through those, and then I'll show you a couple more interesting things here. But it's shaping up to show that the Textus Receptus and the Byzantine text are actually fairly close together. And of course, most of us knew that already. Don't forget to hit the like button below. It helps the algorithm get my content out there for others to see. And I hope you were able to find this video helpful and informative, a little bit of history on the Textus Receptus and its various editions. Anyway, brothers and sisters, until next time, we'll see you around.